What's up everyone, Cam here, and today we're going to talk about the 4 myths of video game addiction. Video game addiction is a hot topic. There's an ongoing debate about whether or not it's real, and because of that, there can be a number of myths that begin to appear, especially in the media. So today I wanted to help us understand more about what these are so we can be aware of them and ultimately have more information to make choices that are empowering for us. The first myth is that video game addiction only impacts a small amount of people. Now, the way you can discern this is that in media articles written about video game addiction, which tend to appear on more pro-gaming type websites, you'll hear them say things like, well, video game addiction is real, but it only impacts a small amount of people. Now, language is very important, and in this instance, they're actually using language to try to diminish how many people this issue actually affects. Now, the World Health Organization has officially recognized video game addiction as a real mental health condition, and based on all the top research papers we have on how prevalent the issue is, ranges can go from under 1% to up to 25%. The highest quality papers and the top researchers tend to agree that when we're really talking about how many people this impacts, we're looking at about 1 to 3% of gamers overall. So these media articles that are describing a small amount of people are really describing a small percentage. But it's important to think about how many people actually play video games. That number is over 2 billion, which begs the question, is 3% of 2 billion a small amount of people? That's 60 million people around the world. If it's 1%, that's 20 million people. And for context, on GameQuarters.com, we currently have 75,000 people a month searching for help on the website from 95 countries. So whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%, or more, there are millions of people out there struggling with this issue. And that's also only taking into consideration people who are more at risk for addiction. What about people who may just be struggling in ways that aren't as severe as literally having your life be destroyed? More important than anything, I like to think about, what if there's even one person? If there's one person out there who's really struggling and they're coming forward asking for help, what should our answer be as a society? I believe that answer should be, how can we help? Instead of, well, there's only one of you. So be aware when they're describing video game addiction being a small issue, what they're really talking about is tens of millions of people. Which brings us to myth number 2. People say that video game addiction is just an escape from underlying mental health conditions. With any addiction, there is going to be comorbid factors. This is well established in addiction research. With video game addiction, common comorbid factors are things like ADHD and autism, anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Now, researchers who deny video game addiction will say that video game addiction is not real because it's just a coping mechanism for anxieties and depression. And although a lot of people who struggle with video game addiction do tend to struggle with anxiety and depression as well, and they may have even come before the video game addiction, we know that not all people who are addicted to video games struggle with anxiety and depression. In a study that we did with Dr. Daniel King, we found that only 48% of people who met criteria for video game addiction also met criteria for moderate or more severe depression. Now, of course, 48% is about half of that cohort, which is a large amount of people, but it's only half. So what about the other half who are not anxious or who are not depressed and yet are still meeting criteria for a video game addiction? And the World Health Organization has also come out and stated that they found video game addiction to be a clinical entity on its own, regardless of other underlying mental health conditions, and needs to be treated independently. So although you may be struggling with ADHD or autism, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, if you're struggling with gaming, you still need to do some sort of treatment to be able to shift that relationship in your life. Just like you'll still need to deal with any anxieties or depressions, ADHD, or other underlying conditions. So be aware when a researcher is saying video game addiction is not real and it's just a mask for an underlying mental health condition, they are oversimplifying this issue and that it's just simply not true. The next myth of video game addiction is that it's not real because gaming is healthy. And this one for me is always just a bit bizarre. Just because some people can drink in healthy ways, does that mean that alcoholism is not real? Or does recognizing the fact that some people do struggle with alcohol, does that mean that we have to vilify all people who are able to drink casually? Yes, most people who play video games are able to do so in a healthy way. Like I said, it's about 1 to 3% of people who play who do struggle. So that means 97% or more people who play video games are probably doing so in a healthy way without significant harm in their life. And for those people, they should be able to game on, have fun, and be able to game in peace. I believe that recognizing video game addiction is important to help people who are coming forward who are saying that they're struggling. And it's also important because then it gives us a more clear distinction of what's a hobby and what's an addiction. If anything, recognizing video game addiction actually helps us be able to discern between those two, and in doing so, be able to help people who are gaming in a healthy way to be able to do so in peace. So yes, gaming can be healthy, and some people are struggling and they deserve our help. Myth number 4. Gaming addiction is not real because this is just a moral panic. This is one of the most common objections to video game addiction, especially in the media. It comes from a researcher, Chris Ferguson, who kind of throughout his career has been able to gain a lot of attention through his argument that we just have moral panic as a society about new technologies and new media. Now, this argument for me is always kind of ironic because he likes to say things like, well, video games are no more addictive than eating a slice of pizza, when, in my opinion, have you looked around the United States and seen the obesity crisis? One of my favorite moments of last year was when the World Health Organization made their decision about gaming disorder, and they actually stated that researchers who were claiming that video game addiction is just a moral panic, they themselves have moral panic about moral panic. These researchers like to say things like, we had a moral panic about Dungeons and Dragons, and we had a moral panic about the TV, and we had moral panic about Harry Potter, and as a society we've always been worried when new technology comes to the forefront. Of course, that's true to some degree, but that doesn't negate the fact that there's tens of thousands of people coming forward every single month asking for help for video game addiction. That doesn't negate the fact that people are coming into hospitals and clinics and asking for help. It doesn't negate the hundreds of families who are in my inbox right now asking for help. These families and these people don't have moral panic. These people are desperate for help, and they deserve help. They don't deserve to be dismissed. They don't deserve to have their concerns diminished. One of the most harmful things that we can actually do to people who are struggling with mental health conditions is to dismiss their concerns. This is actually incredibly stigmatizing, and it already takes enough courage for someone to come forward and ask for help. In fact, there was a study done out of New Zealand that found that one of the biggest reasons why people don't come forward asking for help specifically for a video game addiction is because of concerns over being shamed or stigmatized for it. And this stigma was directly related to the idea of being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. And this is exactly what this argument about moral panic does. Are there some families out there or parents who are being a bit overprotective about technology? Certainly, but that has very little to do with families coming forward saying, my son or daughter has failed out of college. My son or daughter is threatening self-harm if we take technology away. My wife is now leaving me and I'm losing my family. Those are very different situations. If anything, moral panic exists only in the media, and the media exists to polarize. The media exists for clickbait. So if there's any moral panic we should be concerned about, it's those mechanisms, not real human people who are coming forward asking for help because they're struggling. Chris Ferguson comes from a background in the violence in video game conversation. And of course, I empathize with him from that debate because that debate was very much against games and the research on it was very inconclusive. But I also think it's very important to remember that during that debate, there weren't tens of thousands of people coming forward saying that they were concerned about their level of aggression or concerned about themselves becoming the next school shooter. But there are these people coming forward for video game addiction, and we should do more to help them, and we should do more to improve this conversation. So I hope today learning about these myths of video game addiction has been helpful for you. If it has, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications about our next videos. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll talk soon. All right, peace.